NASCAR is going street racing, but instead of going to an existing street course, NASCAR is racing in Chicago. Yeah, on July 1st and July 2nd of 2023, NASCAR will make history. But there's one thing that no one else has discussed that is a huge deal and a huge step forward to NASCAR that could single-handedly be the key to NASCAR's success for the next 10 to 20 years. I'm Alan Bailey. Today we're going to talk about the positives and negatives of NASCAR going street racing in Chicago. NASCAR is not new to the Chicago market, per se. NASCAR has been racing at the Chicagoland Speedway in Joliet, Illinois since 2001, and they raced there successfully and somewhat unsuccessfully for many years until the 2020 pandemic shut down the Chicagoland Speedway. Now, the future of that speedway is still kind of up in the air. They're not necessarily tearing it down, but they are, however, guarding it very closely. And yes, that does mean that the speedway could eventually reopen at some point. We found out this week that for the next 3 years at least, NASCAR is racing in the downtown Chicago area. On July 1st and 2nd of 2023, NASCAR will hold the very first street race in its history for the Cup Series. NASCAR Vice President of Racing Development Strategy Ben Kennedy made the announcement with Chicago Mayor and Bubba Wallace this week, announcing that it will be a 3-year deal for the 2.2-mile 12-turn road course that was actually the exact same course that was used in 2021 in the iRacing Invitational race that we saw on Fox Sports. Now, I actually do like this move. A lot of people have been questioning it. A lot of people are questioning the date, July 4th weekend in downtown Chicago, a town that historically does not have a great crime rate. But I honestly think it's a really good idea. You look at Chicago, it is the third largest city in the United States, and oh, by the way, it happens to be one of the largest sport markets in the country. Getting fans who have never been to a NASCAR race to go to this race might actually be the key to creating new fans for decades to come. I actually really like that, but that's not the thing I'm talking about. We'll get to that in a little bit. I want to talk about all the other features that are happening before that. Now, NASCAR announced that there will be 2 A-list concerts happening at the Chicago Street Race. Now, who these A-list artists are, they don't even know yet. But look at what happened at the LA Coliseum. We saw 2 A-listers get up on stage mid-race. Well, pre-race and mid-race, technically. You had Pitbull doing the pre-race concert, and a lot of the crowd responded extraordinarily positively to it, and you had Ice Cube mid-race. And yeah, a lot of people came out just for these 2 artists. They're very, very popular in the Los Angeles area, and I'd argue probably half the crowd came out just because of these 2. I do think that this is actually a positive move. You look at what NASCAR does as far as live entertainment, and the LA Coliseum was unlike anything we've ever seen in NASCAR before. Now, how did NASCAR follow this up when NASCAR came back to Fontana a few weeks later? No, they didn't have Ice Cube. No, they didn't have Pitbull, even though Pitbull was at the racetrack that day. Instead, they had Collective Soul. Yeah, if you're scratching your head thinking, who the hell is Collective Soul? You're not the only one. No one, I repeat, no one came out to see Collective Soul. They had a one-hit wonder in the early 2000s that NASCAR actually used in their pre-race materials, but honestly, not that many people cared or even noticed them, and they went very much under the radar. Hell, I actually thought they had disbanded and that they were no longer a band until NASCAR made the announcement days before the race. I was actually at the track that day, and I'll tell you, there was only maybe a couple hundred people that were at the stage, but most people were raising their eyebrows, and most people thought they were a bad cover band. And honestly, they sounded like a bad cover band. Not here to diss on Collective Soul, I'm sure they're doing the best with what they got, but it remains to be said, NASCAR just didn't bring in the A-list music talent, even though they're in Southern California, where a lot of A-listers already live. So the A-list concerts, I'm a little skeptical on, but if they get big names like they did at the LA Coliseum, it's a huge step forward. And I'll remind you that Ben Kennedy is the person that actually came up with the idea for the LA Coliseum and spearheaded it. And honestly, everybody who was at that race, media, driver, and new fans, all agreed. It was awesome. That race was a huge step forward, and yeah, the racing was just okay, At best, in the actual main event, the heat races were significantly better, but the new fans were very evident by that race. The analytics themselves said that 70% of the almost 100,000 people in the grandstands had never been to a NASCAR race before. Yeah, how do we know that? Ticket sales. The online ticket sales state that people who purchased those tickets had never purchased any race ticket ever. I don't just mean NASCAR, I mean any race ticket of any kind, according to their account history. That's huge. 70% of 100,000 people had never been to a race ever, and they went to a NASCAR race for the first time and saw everything it has to offer. And they were put onto a pretty decent show, actually. Yeah, more people showed up for the main event than the heat races, but the heat races were absolutely fire. And NASCAR learned one lesson from the Coliseum that we'll get into a little bit later on. Now, a lot of people are asking what's happening to the Xfinity and the Truck Series. At this point, we don't know, but in all likelihood, they will be returning to Road America next year, which the Cup Series unfortunately will not in 2023. That announcement came out, and Road America put out this press release. Change is never easy, but change is often the catalyst for improvement. At Road America, we embrace change, and we are consistently improving our facilities and events to enhance the experience for everyone. We understand NASCAR's efforts to improve the sport while introducing it to new fans, and we look forward to welcoming them back to America's National Park of Speed in the future. Honestly, class act from Road America. It wasn't necessarily the ratings hit that NASCAR wanted. However, for the last 2 years, Road America brought in over 100,000 people to both Cup races. That is extremely hard to do, and guess what? They put on a pretty decent show both years, if I do say so myself. Honestly, I think that Road America is going to be back on the Cup schedule at some point in the near future. I just think NASCAR's oversaturated with road course races at this point, and honestly, Road America can hang on to an Xfinity and hopefully a truck date on July 4th weekend next season, and hopefully they will continue to put on a heck of a show for decades to come. We do know that, quote, one of the IMSA series, unquote, will join the Cup Series on July 1st. Now, the trick with this one is that it's going to be a completely different tire compound, which is going to add a different element to this race entirely. Yeah, you're going to have practices on July 1st, probably, and maybe the day before that, but pretty much the track isn't going to rubber up that well. Plus, since it's a street course, you're dealing with a lot of other factors. NASCAR is going to have to invest a lot of money into the racetrack itself. Now, whether the Chicago City is actually going to invest any money into this, we don't know, because NASCAR and Chicago didn't actually disclose the financial aspects of this. But NASCAR spent well over $1.3 million at the LA Coliseum in 2022 alone, and they're expected to pay about the same amount in 2023. So I do think that NASCAR is going to invest a pretty penny into the Chicago street race for the next 3 years. But at the end of the day, we got to ask ourselves, is street racing really what NASCAR needs? Honestly, yes and no. As far as racing itself, no. The street race is not going to put on an epic battle. We're not going to see side-by-side battles. We're not going to see a last lap pass. We're not going to see a nail biter in the closing laps. We might see a strategy race. We might see a fuel mileage race. And we might see something, ironically, very similar to what we saw at Road America in 2022. Honestly, I'm okay with that, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Just like the racing at the LA Coliseum for the Clash in 2022 didn't matter at the end of the day. What matters is that we have new fans tuning into NASCAR races, paying attention to NASCAR races for the first time. I had non-NASCAR fans asking me, hey, you got tickets to that LA Coliseum race? All week long leading up into that race. And people were honestly paying attention to that race who otherwise would have never paid attention to that race. That's what matters. That's what's important. Because this NASCAR Chicago street race is not for hardcore fans like me and you who have been watching the sport for decades. No. This is to entice new fans into the sport. And honestly, welcome aboard. Because if them watching a Chicago street race, attending a Chicago street race for the first time, and then watching next week and the following week, and as the playoffs in 2023 start, lead them to becoming a NASCAR fan and a motorsport fan, then every penny sunk into the Chicago street race was absolutely worth it. And honestly, we don't know, and we won't know for a while, if the 100,000 plus people who showed up to the LA Coliseum actually tuned in 2022, but seeing as how for the most part ratings have been up in 2022, I think the mad scientist experiment at the LA Coliseum actually did work in hindsight, and I do think that the Chicago street race actually will work in hindsight. But I know what you're thinking. What is the thing that nobody has talked about that is the big deal as far as NASCAR is concerned? The thing that might actually save NASCAR and might actually make the Chicago street race worth its weight in salt. The fact that NASCAR is finally getting with the times, and for the first time since the LA Coliseum, offering premium seating options, including cabanas, suites, and clubs near the start-finish line, the front stretch, and pit road area. This is what really fans want. Yeah, I know. You're thinking, Alan, you're absolutely nuts. And yeah, guys like me and you, we're going to be fine with the $5 seats that actually stick us in the nosebleeds as long as we're there. But frankly, having been at the LA Coliseum, more people, more celebrities were on the top deck on the terrace level than anything. A lot of people were clamoring for the edges, looking at the race. A lot of them wanted the high-end cabanas and things like that. This is what people want in 2022 when they go to live sporting events. It's not just, oh, can I get a good seat that's wide enough with a cup holder or two? No. Nowadays, people want options. They want the high-end options. Because if you're going to spend a few $100s for a ticket, you might as well spend a little bit more and get something extraordinarily nice and make an experience out of it. And I should know, because for 10 years, I worked for the Los Angeles Angels. And when I was there, I worked extraordinarily closely with every single department that was there, including suite sales. Let me put it this way. The Angels are not making money on the $5 tickets in the nosebleeds. They're not even making money on the $200 tickets behind home plate. No. They're making money on suites. Yeah, people want suites and they want the experience. This is how the Angels are literally keeping themselves in the profit margins. Because if you've been to an Angel game lately, which, if I'm being honest, I know you haven't because no one has. I've seen what they're doing in the standings and I've seen what they're doing in the stadium. Nobody's been to a game at Angel Stadium lately, unless the Dodgers are playing. The Angels make their money on suites, and most teams do these days in general. It's not just parking, it's not just ticket admissions, it's the upsell. That's where most sporting events make their money and where most profits come from. This is what NASCAR needs to do. They're starting to transition away from TV money and starting to look at the future of ticket sales. Because charging $25 per person, yes, is going to keep the lights on, but you're not going to get rich on that and you're not going to grow the sport that way. Offering high-end cabanas, high-end suites, and club options at the start-finish line overlooking pit road is what is going to sell. And looking at the renderings of what NASCAR has planned, this is going to be a massive undertaking. NASCAR is starting to transition into something similar to what we see at F1 races and not NASCAR races, which is absolutely what NASCAR needs to do in order to survive. Yeah, NASCAR's not hurting for money right now. Absolutely not. These teams are hurting for money, but not NASCAR as an organization. And kudos to NASCAR for trying something extraordinarily different and something that honestly I think is the key to the future of the sport. NASCAR is learning from F1 and making some big changes. No, we're not necessarily getting wonderful TV programming from NASCAR. I'll never watch the Austin Dillon show ever. But instead, they're changing the at-track experience so that you can get a suite, you can get high-end seating and lounge areas. This is something that NASCAR started to dip their toes into at their racetracks with seating options in their infield. But that's not what fans want. Fans want an experience overlooking the racetrack, high above so that they can see the entire racetrack, or at least part of it in Chicago's case. No, this is not going to be the F1 Miami race where only the super rich are allowed to get to this race. Instead, the average Joe is going to be allowed to get a ticket to this race while catering to the super rich. This is the best of both worlds, and NASCAR is absolutely embracing it, and they're trying something new. I think that Ben Kennedy is the future of NASCAR and that his ideas are wholesale and absolutely what the sport needs at this time. NASCAR has shown they're not afraid to make changes, wholesale changes, in order to grow the sport and have it thrive in 2023 and beyond. They started it in 2022 with the LA Coliseum and the Clash, and honestly, they're continuing to grow. NASCAR needs to get into the cities. It's not enough to ask people to drive 25 or 50 miles one way to go to a racetrack 2 counties away in the middle of nowhere. NASCAR learned their lesson with the Chicagoland Speedway, and they brought NASCAR to the city where the people are. It's exactly what's happening across America right now. Auto Club Speedway is in Fontana, California, a full county away from downtown Los Angeles, and 50 miles one way in Los Angeles traffic. No thank you. I'm a fan that lives about 20 miles away from the racetrack, and even I dislike the drive getting to that racetrack, but I'll make it every time because that racetrack puts on phenomenal racing, which is exactly what we saw in 2022. But I'm also the same guy who drove 55 miles one way to get to the LA Coliseum, and guess what? I absolutely loved both events, but I'm the exception, not the norm. Most people don't want to drive more than 10 miles one way to get to a racetrack or a sporting event. And it's like pulling teeth to get people to do it these days with gas prices. NASCAR needs to get their events into the cities where the people are, not just the counties surrounding the big cities. But for now, honestly, I applaud Ben Kennedy and NASCAR for the Chicago move. I honestly hope that it sticks around longer than 3 years. Will the racing be great? Time will tell, but from what we saw during the iRacing Invitational race, it's not going to be that bad, and it's going to be pretty darn entertaining. Will NASCAR do something similar with Nashville, Detroit, St. Petersburg, or Long Beach? Only time will tell, but for now, this is a huge step forward for NASCAR, and NASCAR putting itself into the heart of 2 of the largest cities in the United States is a huge step forward. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you. What do you think about NASCAR's move to the Chicago street race now that it's been a few days and it's sunken in for us? Do you think it's a good move? Or do you think that NASCAR missed the mark entirely with this one? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're there, make sure that you mash that subscribe button and that you give us a thumbs up to help support the channel. It helps us out so darn much. And while you're at it, make sure that you give me a follow on my social media accounts at HeyAlanBailey. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Alan Bailey, and we'll see you at the track.